Hello, welcome. I see everyone in the chat saying hello back. We won't chat, we'll just say that. It's very nice to have you all here with us. As Rachel said, we are here with Science Says. That's a group over at UC Davis. And we are a group of scientists that are passionate about talking about science and what we do as scientists with people like you. And so I will throw this website and this email address here into the chat if you guys want to look at our website or email us after this session. We also have 2 more sessions today with different speakers if you're interested in going to those. And so without further ado, let's meet some scientists. And as Rachel said, please type your questions into that Q&A feature at the bottom or the top of your screen, and I will go through them as the moderator and ask our 3 panelists those questions, and hopefully we can answer as many questions as we can before we have to go at 1:55. So as I said, my name is Mary Madera. I will be moderating today, but I am a strawberry flavor researcher, so I'm also a scientist and very excited to be here. And I'll pass it off. Go ahead, Claudia.
Hi, everyone. Hola, I'm Claudia Carter. I'm actually originally from Ecuador. I became a food scientist. I went to North Dakota State University, and then I did my master's in cereal science. I'm actually currently doing my PhD in nutrition and exercise science because I like to connect the food science all the way to the health to our bodies. But I actually work with agriculture. I work with farmers. And I'm very excited because I have seen, or I see how the wheat crop, like, you know, the field you see behind me, how it's planted as a little seed, how it germinates, how it grows, how farmers take care of it. So it's good for us to eat it. And then it goes through the process where millers take it to make flour. And then one of your favorite products, for example, pasta, as you can see me here holding a pasta. So we make pasta in our lab. We make bread, tortillas, and we have had children actually visiting our lab where they get hands-on activity on milling, on doing experiments with flour, as what we food scientists and cereal scientists do. And then we actually have the children making the product so they can try it. So I love my job because you don't only get to actually experiment with the things that you have in your hands, but you actually get to eat them and try them as well. Because we want to make sure that the food that we make as food scientists are good for you. And then my passion with nutrition is that I want to be able to make the food as nutritious as possible for all of us to eat it. And one of the best ways to have wheat is actually in the form of whole wheat or whole grains. So that's me. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name's Gabby, and I am a first-year graduate student in the plant biology graduate group at UC Davis. And my journey as a scientist actually began kind of late. I initially had a career as a florist for a while, and then I also managed a greenhouse where we cultivated and sold houseplants. And then during that time, I became a mom, and there's a picture of my 3rd grader on the slide. And so that's really fun. And then I became a plant biologist. So plant biology is, in my opinion, the best biology, but I'm a little biased, but it's very important. And as you probably know, one type of scientist you can be is a chemist. But what you may not know is that plants are actually the best chemists on the planet. So plants can make chemicals that baffle our human chemists. These chemicals are important for medicine. There's chemicals that can go into making biofuels and bioplastics. I even know of plant chemistry that's being used to fight climate change. And as Claudia said, you know, plants are also really important for food. Even if you don't like eating veggies, your meat products start out, those animals have to get their nutrition from plants. So my goal is to study plants and learn how to be a chemist from plants, learn from these chemical techniques that plants have used for millions of years, and try to make good medicines and bioproducts. So feel free to ask me any questions about my journey as a scientist, plant biology in general. You can ask me about my dog. This is Cornbread also on the slide. She's the best girl. So yeah, it's really nice to be here today with you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabby. And then Heather, go for it.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Heather. I studied psychology at Boston College. I'm from Boston. And then I moved out to study biological psychology, which is essentially neuroscience at UC Davis. And I'm really interested in how the brain affects our behavior on a daily basis. And specifically, I study how our experiences in our childhood and throughout adulthood can affect our brains to ultimately affect our behaviors. So in this process called epigenetics, our experiences put on these stable marks in the brain that essentially turn some genes on, some genes off in a permanent way that can ultimately affect our behavior. So I use mice in the lab to study this because we really want to understand what's going on in the brain on a deeper level. In humans, we have to use animal models to do that. And so for me in particular, I specifically study the experience of motherhood in adulthood and how that experience can change a mother's brain and make her permanently more responsive to infants throughout her lifetime. And I'm looking to see what epigenetic marks are involved in that. So feel free to ask me questions about my research or about psychology, anything you're interested in. I'm happy to answer them.
Great. So yeah, so again, we'll start asking the panel some questions, and please type them into the Q&A feature. And so let's, a nice easy one, the three panelists, what was exciting about science to you as a kid?
I can start. So I told you I grew up in Ecuador, and I remember that we used to have science fairs. And one of those, I was probably 6, 7 years old, but I still remember that, where an older student was showing how she had made Jello, but the gelatin from actually, adding some different ingredients together so it will behave like gelatin for making Jello. And I remember trying that and thinking, whoa, this is really cool how you can mix different ingredients together and get to something that, hey, I buy in the store, but I can actually make it at home by mixing those ingredients together. So that's the first, I remember, memory of me thinking of chemistry and how things interact with each other to make something work. And so then when you eat it, have the texture or have the flavor that we want. That's my first memory.
I can go next. So I was more into math, I think, as a young student. And so I didn't even find my passion for science until later. So I thought, because I like talking and I like asking questions. And the great thing about science is it's all about asking questions. And if you don't have the answers, you go out and find them. So I guess all along I've always been a scientist. I just didn't know it.
I think for me, when I was younger, there's this huge museum of science in Boston that I used to go to as a kid a lot. And I feel like that kind of sparked my love for science, all the hands-on activities they have there, different exhibits. I really loved biology and I was just fascinated with the human body. So when they had exhibits about that, I would love to learn about it. Just all the different aspects of your body that have to go into making you do daily activities and you're not even thinking about it. I just always thought that was so cool. So definitely those experiences shaped me as a scientist.
Awesome. So we have a question here for Heather that I will expand out to the other panelists. The question was, what types of experiments do you do with mice and what have you found? So if Heather can start that, and then if Gabby and Claudia can talk a little bit about the types of experiments you do and what we call model organisms you use, like Heather uses mice. What do Gabby and Claudia use? I think let's start with Heather.
Sure. Yeah. So the types of experiments that I do currently, I am looking, like I said, for some epigenetic mechanism that's involved in this sort of consolidation of learning. So once a mother gives birth and she interacts with her infants, that memory is always going to be there of her interacting with her infants. And how is that maternal memory, we call it, consolidated in the brain? And so I look to see what is involved in that memory. I look to see what brain regions are involved, what types of genes are involved in making that memory stay consolidated over time. So I'm really interested in neural circuits and brain circuits, the different regions interacting with each other in order for this to happen, and which genes are involved in getting turned on to make this happen as well.
Go next. So as plant biologists, there's a couple different what we call model organisms, which have they're model organisms because typically they can be grown really fast, because you don't really want a tree as an organism you're going to study if you're going to have like 70 years to wait for it to get to be an adult tree. So model organisms, are fast growing, and we understand the genome of specifically Arabidopsis is a type of plant that is studied a lot. But for me, I'm interested in specialized metabolites, which are these like unique chemicals that are different in every single plant. There's the model organism for me is not as clear cut. So I'm not quite sure, I'm still in my first year, which plants I'm going to be studying, but I imagine I'll use Arabidopsis at some point and do experiments with those.
Yeah, so we have a completely different approach because we don't work with, we work with the plants, but the work that we do as a food scientist is that we have to take that and process it. Now, what we might be able to do is, for example, when I process the flour, so we will be trying testing different, what we call wheat classes. And within each wheat classes that we have, we're testing varieties. So the wheat class, depending on what you're making, let's say pasta, you have the durum wheat class, that's one. And then the hard red wheat is the one that I would call the red wheat. So within those, then you have different varieties that behave differently. So we will be working with our plant scientist who is actually doing testing things on a greenhouse, for example, and then sending the plant, the seed to us so we can grind them up and then do experiments with those seeds that have been ground into flour so we can put it into a bread product. And then the other thing that we could do with that is like organisms that grow in the bread. So we might be able to see, how long can a bread stay on the shelf before a mold, for example, grows in there. So we can see, we can check that out. But that's the kind of, just as an example of research that we do with the wheat.
Awesome. Thanks, panelists. There's an upvoted question that I think all three of us could probably answer, but it's probably for Claudia. And it says, are there harmful chemicals in food like pasta? That's a loaded question. Again, I think anyone could take it. But Claudia, do you have an answer for that? And also in the chat, someone mentioned that they and their mother have celiac disease. If you have any comments on that. You're not a medical doctor, you're a food scientist, and they are different. But just so you know, someone in the chat said that.
Okay, so that's a really good question. Like anything we grow, it can actually go bad on the field. So that's why we have regulations. So one of the things that might be able to happen in wheat specifically if it's grown on the field, just like what you see here, and then rain that week that is dry, there's rain on. What will happen is a fungus might grow, that's called mycotoxin. And as its name says, it's actually a toxin. And it's not only toxic for humans, but also for animals. So we have regulations that you will be able, the people who grows wheat will be able to test it, because they might say, hey, it rained on. So we know we have the potential of that toxin to be there. So they will send it to labs. So if the crop has high levels of toxin, which is in parts per million, then they won't be able to sell it even to feed animals, because it might be too high. So I would say that could be harmful to you if you consume it. But thankfully, we have regulations that actually make sure that we have safe food to eat. Okay, so in response to the celiac disease, as Mary say, I'm not a doctor, but that's actually a serious disease that has to be actually, you have to go to a doctor and get tested for it. And that's an it's your immune system that is actually, reacting to these. And so that will be something that, yes, you need to keep an eye on that. And if you have it, avoid wheat, avoid barley, and avoid even, they say, oats, which are have traces of gluten.
Awesome, thank you. So no, there are not harmful chemicals in your food because of the Food and Drug Administration. And celiac disease, yes, it's very serious. Hopefully the person that said that has found a way to manage it and still eat foods that they love. Thank you to everyone for putting questions in the chat. There are some really good ones. I can already tell we won't be able to answer all of them, but please keep them coming. Here's one for Gabby, just to throw it off to Gabby. This is a great one from someone named Andy. Gabby, if plant chemicals are sometimes poisonous, how do you test the chemicals? I think that might be getting at how you work with the plants and your specialized metabolites when sometimes they're harmful.
That's a good question. So of course, safety is a big priority. But specialized metabolites, so a lot of them are actually toxic, right? Even the ones, I'm going to give you an example, even ones that we use for medicine can be classified as toxic. So one of the medicines I'm interested in is a chemotherapy drug called Taxol, and it's a specialized metabolite, and it's toxic, but it's one of the best chemotherapy drugs out there. So working with that, we would, I guess, have to be careful, but in a lab, you don't ingest anything. And there's a lot of regulations. You be really careful when you're working with chemicals and anything in a lab. And some of the methods that we would use to look at these chemicals, I guess, so if we express genes in a plant, or if we just study chemicals that are already in a plant, we would have to first grind up the plant, and then extract the chemical from the plant. And this entire time, we're not ingesting anything. So even if we're working on a medicine, right, that medicine isn't going to get tested inside of a lab I would be working with, because I'm not a medicinal chemist, really. And those have to go to drug trials and all those things. So we would extract the chemical, and then we can study it via mass spec as a way to look at different chemicals within a mix of chemicals. And there's some other ways too that are more complicated. But yeah, so basically, to protect scientists from the chemicals they're working with, there are gloves, respirators if you need to. There's big fume hoods that, I don't know if you guys are familiar with what a lab looks like, but in most labs there's a fume hood where they sucks all the toxic air and it treats it. So you work within those to protect yourself from any toxic fumes. I hope I answered that question.
Yeah, I think so. And also, really strict rule in labs, which might be different from your classrooms if you're in them, is it's a really big no-no to eat or drink anything in a lab space. And that's another way that we ensure, we as a campus, we as scientists, we as safety people, ensure that nothing poisonous is getting into our systems, because we're covering ourselves with gloves and clothes. We're not eating or drinking anything. And so there's no way that Gabby is going to ingest any of her poisonous plants. I promise you that. Gabby is safe. That's good. We have another question. This one I believe is aimed at Heather. It says, and it's very highly upvoted, do you have to pamper or affect the mice in any way before you experiment on them?
Oh, interesting. Pamper or affect. So before I experiment, so mice are scared of a lot of things. And when you have to single house them for the experiments, because they're usually grouped housed. They're social animals, but in order to do our type of testing, they need to be alone. So what I would typically do is single house them for a few days before starting the experiment. And that way they get settled in their new environment. When you first change their cage, they're very stressed out. It's like the most stressful thing you can do to a mouse. So we just let them sort of get used to that cage, and get used to being alone for a little bit before starting an experiment. For my experiments, sometimes I will give them a particular drug that actually causes some genes to be turned on, some genes in particular that are involved in maternal behavior. So that's where the epigenetic aspect comes in, where we're trying to see if what kind of epigenetic mechanism is involved in maternal behavior and why females can be so responsive. So by giving this drug, we can sort of facilitate that process, and sort of induce genes to turn on. And that way these animals become maternal faster. So I hope I answered that question. That's kind of the treatment I give the mice before starting an experiment.
Great. And Heather, can you give us a quick one sentence on what epigenetic means in case
Yes, definitely. So epigenetics means, maybe you are familiar with the nature versus nurture debate, where nature means that we are the way we are because of our genes, whereas nurture is we are the way we are because of our environment. But epigenetics is the idea that those two things are not acting independently to affect behavior in some way. They're actually interacting with each other. So that's how our experiences and our environment can affect behavior, because they don't actually change our DNA at all, but they change which genes in our genome are getting turned on and which are getting turned off. So that's how environment and our genes can interact with each other. And that's what epigenetics is.
Awesome. Thank you. Here's going to be a quick one because none of us are astrophysicists, but another upvoted question is the sun going to explode in, I think that's 9 million years? I don't know. Does anyone have an answer? I think yes, maybe, but ask Neil deGrasse Tyson. Anyone know? No, you're asking the wrong group. Here's one I think can go out to a couple of people. Have you grown or worked with crops that have pesticides?
I'll start, I guess. So my initial research, I did not deal with agricultural crops. I dealt with more ecology, where we studied plants that were out in nature. So I have no experience with pesticides.
So I work with farmers, and farmers have, across the United States and the world, have access to safely use pesticides, again, regulated through their governments. So I would say I don't work, that's not my area of research. We do work with UC Davis, where our agronomists are working directly with farmers, testing, pesticides. And but that's definitely not my area of expertise. But I would say I indirectly work with the pesticide side because I work with farmers. But my take on that and the way that I have learned from them is that, often pesticides are used only and in the amount that it's needed. So not all crops will use pesticides, and the crops that are using pesticides are making sure that are following all those regulations that are in place, again, to be grown safely.
Awesome. Yeah. And whoever asked that, there's a lot of material online about pesticides. I personally have sat in the Capitol. I sat in on a open forum about pesticides the lawmakers were having. That's definitely something that's open to the public if you're interested in getting more involved. But as Claudia said, they're just like food chemicals, very highly regulated and safe. They wouldn't send it to a supermarket if it was harmful. Here's one for Heather that kind of brings in two upvoted questions. One is, in what ways can your brain be affected in a bad and good way? And then someone else was asking if hitting your head really hard would affect your brain.
Yes, hitting your head hard might affect your brain. I mean, luckily we have our really thick skull to protect us from those kinds of things. But unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't protect us always, which is why it's really important to wear a helmet when you go bike riding or skateboarding or whatever. You got to protect your brain. It's so important. It's involved in so many things for your body. But the other question of whether good things or bad things can, sorry, what was the question again?
It was, are there good or bad things you can do to affect your brain? So
Yes.
I think, things you can do to help your brain or things that you shouldn't be doing because they're bad for your brain.
Right. Well, as you know, I'm really interested in how experiences can affect your brain. And there are a lot of bad things out there that can ultimately change what's happening. There are toxins in the environment that can ultimately affect your gene expression output and can affect which genes get turned on or off, and that can totally affect behavior. What you ingest, I mean, there's just a lot of things in the environment that can be toxic for your brain. And not getting enough sleep, that's a big thing. Sleep is so important for you to get rid of toxins from your brain. It's a very restorative process. You just want to make sure you're getting enough of that. But then there are good things, feeding your body the right kinds of food. Exercising is really important to help with your mood, and it really gets the blood flowing in your brain and make sure that there's a lot of it keeps a balance of activity of different neurotransmitters, different chemicals in your brain. So those are some good things that you can do as well.
Awesome. Thank you. Here's one that I like for everyone, and it is simply, why do you like science?
I like science. It's kind of a repeat of what I said before, but because I can ask questions and I'm learning stuff every day. Like the amount of stuff when I go to work and come home, I'm amazed. I look back 2 weeks and I'm like, how did I learn this much? And so every day's different because you can ask a different question, you can move in a different direction. And you just learn so much, and it's fun.
Yeah, I would say similar to Gabby. When you have something that you're really passionate about, there's an endless questions that you're always asking about, like what if, what else, and that kind of mindset of curiosity, it sets you to a road that it definitely doesn't have an ending. And it's actually fun. It's not like, oh, I need to find an answer and then you stop at that. what we would call is a growth mindset. You're always growing, you're always learning, you're always making mistakes, because it's also part of the process. You make mistakes where you learn, and that's the beauty about science, that with those mistakes, then hopefully there are no large mistakes, but then there you know what you're doing, and then with that, then you set a different trail or a different route of what to take and what to do to get to the next outcome where you want to be at. So yeah, you're always learning. I love that.
Yeah, I mean, similar to what Gabby and Claudia said, I love science for that fact, for that you're always learning. And also I just love the idea of being able to do something that'll ultimately help people down the line. Especially in biology, especially with neuroscience, we're really interested in studying mental illnesses. I'm interested in understanding what happens when a mother doesn't take care of her children, what's going on in her brain when that happens. There are a lot of different disorders and illnesses out there that's so important to keep learning about, just having a basic understanding of the of what's occurring in the brain in general, that'll help us understand what happens when those processes in the brain end up going wrong that leads to these illnesses.
Awesome, great. Let's see. Here is the next two will be for everyone. Here's one that says, from Andy again, how have your jobs changed during the COVID-19 pandemic?
So we just closed the first month or so because we're considered, we work in agriculture and food. So we had to continue working with farmers and our food manufacturers. So we actually went back to work right away. We have been working at our lab/office. We're a small place, so we're 5 of us, where we constantly, we're still wearing masks, keeping the distance. And because we're doing experiments on our own, our station is pretty spread. So we basically we didn't have to change much or at all. And thankfully we have been working safely. Our team has been, safe so far. So yeah.
So as a first year graduate student, my job is mainly to be a student. So I have been able to work in some labs. We rotate, where I try out different labs and work for different people and kind of get a feel for different types of science before we decide where we're going to work. So being a student, I have done endless Zoom meetings, as you probably are all familiar with. So it's very similar to my son's 3rd grade. We sit, in the same room, and he does his school and I do my school.
Yeah, my lab had closed in the beginning, and we didn't reopen until 4 months later. So I started going back to lab in the summer with, of course, a lot of restrictions that Claudia was saying. And my lab is also very small. There's 2 people there's me and then another person in the lab. So we easily keep our distance in the lab space. So it hasn't been that bad. But those 4 months were tough to find things to do because a lot of my work is in the lab. So it's hard, put a little hiatus on doing experiments for a little bit, but I'm glad to be back in there again.
Great. There's this one's for me. What type of experiments do I do with strawberries, and what goal do I have in mind usually? So the program that I work with, the breeding program, their overall goal is to make strawberries better. And that means better for consumers, something like fruit quality, similar to what Claudia is doing, and also better for farmers so that they grow healthier, they grow faster, they grow stronger, and so that the farmers can make a living off of their strawberries. I work on flavor, which means that I test a bunch of different strawberries. I grind them up into what I call smoothies. And then I use a machine that tells me all the different smells or flavors of a strawberry. And then I can kind of connect that back to those strong growing qualities. And so that's what I do as a flavor researcher. So thank you for asking. And then there was one that I really liked that was, well, now I can't find it. It was, how can you tell good science information from like false opinions in the media, I think was the question. People want to take that.
That one's tricky. So there's a lot of information coming from a lot of different places. And if you're like me, you know, I use social media, and so I get information from all kinds of places. But it's really important to make sure you understand where that information is coming from. So typically, like from news places, they oftentimes have some sort of bias where maybe they have special interests or a different perspective on the world that they are in. It's beneficial to them to promote this perspective. So they're not always the best sources. But as a scientist, we have access to scientific journals and papers, which are also, I think, available to the public for the most part. There's different, like Google Scholar, you can find original science publications that are published by scientists, and those have been peer reviewed, which means that other scientists that don't even know them have looked over their research and said, you know, maybe this doesn't seem right. Can you actually fix this and tell me, like, why do you really think that this is happening? So they go under really harsh peer review where you can make sure that the science that's coming out in that publication is accurate and unbiased as much as possible. And so that's a really good place to get scientific information.
Yeah, I mean, Gabby did a great job at answering that. It's, yeah, you know, when you see information, it's a really good place to look, to go back to the original source of that information to see if what they're saying is true and if they interpreted it correctly. Because it's hard, and science can be hard to understand and be able to interpret in a clear way. Like Gabby was saying, there's a lot of biases that can happen. So I think just going back to that original source would help a lot.
Yeah, I don't have much to add, as you guys have said it very well. But I do have to that aspect. But I do have to mention something that sometimes I think we forget, and we're lucky. I grew up in a country where we don't have what we call here land grant universities. We don't have that great research that we have in the United States, and that's one of the reasons why actually I came to study here, because we look at United States, universities as being one of the top. So when I learned, and I study at North Dakota State University, which is a land grant university, the same as UC Davis is. And I think we take that for granted a lot. So if you ever have a question, I'm sure you might be able to contact researchers or people that are at those land grant universities that can provide, resources to you. And they're right here. We have the best universities that are in agriculture and food. They're right here in California. So I would say, don't hesitate to just ask questions. Sometimes they might think that, the people over there and feels intimidating, but I am not one of those. You can send me an email, you can call me, and I'll be so happy to help you out. So.
Great answers, all of you. Here is a couple for Heather. Hopefully they're short. Someone asked, what % of our brain do we use? And then someone else asked if you know about or learn about Phineas Gage, the famous person that got the rail stake through his brain. I think the answer to that is you probably do. And then lastly, Heather, it was, do you work with babies and their moms? And how do you gather your data, which I think you covered a little bit at the beginning. So % of brain, Phineas Gage, babies and moms.
% of brain, that's a good question. I feel like I did know that at some point in time, and I don't know a number right now, but we use a big percentage of our brain. I think there is a rumor out there that we only use like 10%, and I don't think that's true at all. So, the brain is just involved in so many things in our body. So it's a pretty big percentage. For the Phineas Gage question, yes, I'm familiar with that. He had a rod go through his brain, and it was through his prefrontal cortex, which was an area of the brain that was really important for making decisions and affects your mood and your personality. And his whole personality changed from that. And it's interesting studies like those where we first understood what these brain regions were really important for. So it's unfortunate accidents that sort of led to understanding what the prefrontal cortex was for, and that led to further experiments. And then sorry, what was the other question, Mary?
It was if you actually work with babies and their mothers.
Right.
And if so, how do you gather data from humans? I
Okay.
think you say you work with mice.
I work with mice, yes, unfortunately. But the work that I'm doing hopefully translates to humans. So eventually we can also use these studies that I'm doing now to test similar types of things in humans as well at some point.
Awesome. There is one here that says, can you eat strawberry DNA? And I'm just going to say that everything that you eat contains DNA. And that's because we eat animals if you are an omnivore, and we eat plants if you are vegan or vegetarian or an omnivore. And all of those things contain DNA. Things that don't contain DNA are things like rocks. So trees have DNA, plants have DNA, animals have DNA, humans have DNA. So yes, you can eat strawberry DNA. If you ate it by itself, it wouldn't taste like anything. But pretty much everything you eat, every organism has DNA. And so everything you eat has DNA. And then a good follow-up, a couple people are asking Claudia, if you make your own pasta, because you mentioned you make your own pasta, or do you buy pasta from the store?
Yeah, I love that question. So about a year ago, this is a personal note, I actually stopped buying, well, a year ago, I guess we couldn't find flour on the stores. But we had, we had grains in our lab because we have it. And then I have a small machine mill that I make my own flour here. Anyways, I started making a lot more fresh pasta. So yes, I do. The two reasons why I decided to stop buying fresh pasta after that, it's because I decided that I wanted to eat healthier. So 100% whole grain pasta was a go-to with these, to have my own flour that I can make it. And also fresh pasta tastes just so much more delicious. So yeah, I make also homemade whole wheat tortillas. I made last night pizza with whole grain flour. And honestly, it's really, really easy. You don't have to have your own grinder to make flour. You can buy now whole wheat flour at the store, and you can make it at home. It's a really fun activity. I do it with my kids, where they help me to get the pizzas, the pizza bowls, and then yeah, so try it. And pasta, if you can try it, I'll tell you, you will not think the pasta tastes the same after that. You'll be like, this is the best pasta I ever had. I don't want to have that other pasta. So try it. Yeah.
I have a picture of me as a 4-year-old making pasta with my mom, and I swear it's part of the reason I got into science, because I learned about cooking as a kid, and I cooked with my mom, and I watched all the Food Network shows, and then I went to college and I got a degree, and then I was like, well, food is plants, and so then I started studying strawberries. So yes, if you can cook with your siblings or parents or guardians, I think it's a great, it is science. Cooking is science, so maybe you didn't think of it that way. So if you can cook your own pasta, I recommend it also. So we have under 10 minutes. I wish we could answer every question. I know that we won't be able to. I've seen a couple here that are getting at what it's like to be a scientist. And so for all of the panelists, one is it hard to be a scientist? Because this person wants to be one when they grow up. So yay, please be one when you grow up. So is it hard? And a couple people are asking about if it's frustrating being a scientist and when it might get frustrating and how do you manage the frustration? So is it hard to be a scientist? Is it frustrating?
I'll start. because it's hard. Yes. So it's hard, but I remember when I was touring UC Davis and one of the professors said something that really stuck with me, and explained it, I think, really well. If you put yourself, and maybe this definitely doesn't apply to everything, but if you put yourself in an academic environment that is a little bit uncomfortable, it's a little bit hard, that's when you really grow. And that's when you really learn. And when I find myself often in rooms with a bunch of people that are way smarter than me. And I found that as long as I just keep asking questions, I'm learning, and it fuels that passion. So if you have the passion, nothing's too hard. And if somebody's ever told you that you can do anything you want, it's true. And I've learned that more and more as an adult. So.
I can go next. Yeah, I mean, like Abby said, it can be frustrating. Sometimes it can be hard. It's definitely, sometimes when you need a particular technique working in your lab, it can take months to even get it working. And that can be hard sometimes to troubleshoot all that. But in the end, I feel like it's really rewarding when you get it to work and then you're able to answer the question that you wanted to ask for a while, and actually get an answer from it. And you did that yourself. It's a very rewarding career to have, the fact that you get to keep on learning. And even though there are roadblocks in the way, you learn from those roadblocks. So it's just a constant learning process, but it's fun.
Yeah, for me, it's certainly the same. There are times where you don't know where this is leading to, and you just keep pushing forward and keep making sure that what you're doing at least has the meaning that you want to have, that it's something it's in the area that you want to be working on. At first, I remember when I studied food science, I didn't know food science is such a broad field, so I didn't know, did I want to be in dairy science, did I want to be in cereal science? So, making sure that at that time when I got in cereal science, I actually got not knowing much. I was like, okay, let's see what it is about. And ended up being really fun. Sometimes you ended up doing that, because, one thing caught your attention and then it became really super exciting. Sometimes not, but again, what everybody say, you learn through that whole process. So I'll say, for me, in general, it's more fun than frustrating, because I would say growing in your field as you get challenged is really certainly part of that fun aspect of it. So you're never going to stop growing in science. You're always going to be growing.
Awesome. And that also, I think, answered, there were several questions about what your favorite parts are about science and what got you into your field. And again, I think all three of you have covered what got you into it and what your favorite parts are. Would anyone like to add anything to that? Or do you feel like you've covered your favorite parts and what got you into science? That's what I thought. You all covered it. Here's a quick one for Gabby. Do you work with cactuses? People really like cactus on this channel right now. And also, since you're a plant biologist, do you have plants at home? So you work with plants, do you go home to plants?
So I have never worked with cactuses. They're very cool. I have several in my house. I do have a lot of plants. I don't have any in this room, but I love plants. And it's funny because there is a lot of plant biologists that love plants, but I found that there are some that don't, which is interesting. They just love the biology. But because plant biology and what's called like horticulture, which is like taking care of plants, they're very separate things. And so I'm lucky I have the overlap that I love plants also and work with them.
Awesome. So we have 3 minutes left. So I'm trying to find one final question that everyone can answer. Let's see. Why don't we if everyone can touch on what not necessarily your full day to day, but a really quick, like, what does your day as a scientist look like? And what is your goal in your field? So we have 3 minutes, so that's 1 minute each.
I'll go first, try to keep it simple. And I think I covered at the beginning, but basically for me, it's putting all the three things together: growing, processing, and making delicious and nutritious food. So my goal with the PhD in nutrition that I'm pursuing, even though I'm a full-time, actually I work full-time, it's that I want to be tightening it up to public health. So what I want is to bring healthier food to school lunches, so our kids are being nourished healthy food. Because, you know, as Heather is studying the mind, for your mind to work, you also need to nourish your bodies that are giving you enough nutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, that are good nutrients, not bad nutrients, that are loading your body. So for me, fighting for school meal lunches to be healthier, it's my goal in life.
So my overall goal as a scientist every day is just to learn more and make sure that I'm fulfilled in what I'm doing. I really like people, and I think if I can make a difference in the world just a little bit to help people, I feel like that will be enough to fulfill me as a scientist.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, my main goal as a scientist is also to help people to get one step closer to understanding certain disorders and why they occur. And my ultimate goal is to help communicate that science to people. And that's my big goal in life as a scientist. And what I think I'm most passionate about is doing the science and communicating that.
Awesome. Well, thank you to all of our panelists for being here and answering all those questions. Thank you to everyone that asked questions. Again, I've put our email and our website down because I know we didn't cover all the questions you guys had, and all of them were amazing. So thank you, and we hope you enjoyed our panel at North Bay Discovery Day.
And I want to say thank you to the panelists. You did excellent. Your answers were wonderful. Thank you. And now we'll let the participants or the people go to another room.